Today's video is of everybody's favorite computer maker. And yes, if you're not into comical jokes, I suggest you fast forward. But guess what? This video is on another day! Woo! Okay, joke's over. On with the regularly scheduled program. Blurry. Try that again. Underneath the battery. Excuse me. That's totally appropriate. This is a DDR2 mobile system, and usually can't put things into words today. More Mountain Dew. Solves everything. Much better. Good day, folks. Jordan here again with another laptop video. Although I should probably fix the camera orientation. Be right back. As it turns out, I not only had to change the camera orientation, but I also had to change the scene because way over there it was just kind of dark. So I moved it over to the recliner so that way we could not only have a better lighting system with a 6500K bulb, but more of the light. So now you can actually sort of see what I'm trying to present today. Isn't that just nice? You're welcome. What we have on tap today is a Dell Inspiron 1526 from 2008. Specifically, this one was built in March of 2008.
The system image was probably made around March 10th, 2008, although it could have been later than that date because that was when all the software that this machine had on it when it was new was already preloaded, was the 10th of March, according to the Dell service tag. Although, like I said, there's margin of error because, again, build dates and system image dates are two completely different things, as well as the purchase and first run date, that sort of thing. They're all different.
But I digress. So March of 2008 was when this particular Inspiron was made. And this one was actually a decently well-equipped model from 2008. And you'll see why, because of some of the features and or optional features that were actually offered and some were included on this unit. So let's dive in. On the front of the laptop, we have an infrared remote sensor. And this probably would have been used for some kind of internal, inside of the express card slot anyway, remote that could be used for not only the Windows Media Center, but also for the Dell Media Direct, which also came pre-installed on this computer. Now, I'm not sure if there was actually a remote that came with this computer when it was new and I just didn't get it, or if it didn't come with a remote at all and it's just missing the blanking plate. But that is what would have been occupied in there, is an infrared remote sensor. You have two headphone jacks, which is kind of interesting, and it makes me wonder if you could actually reprogram one of them to be a line-in jack. Not quite sure. I haven't checked the audio stuff on the computer. You do have a microphone in, some kind of pinhole. I'm not sure if that's a microphone or not. I'm assuming that it is because of where it's positioned, but it just seems kind of odd because most of the time you might block that. And finally, we have an SD, Memory Stick Pro, and MMC card reader on the front, which is nice. And in fact, it even still has the ridiculous Dell blinking plate thingy in it. You probably cannot see in there, but that's okay. That's your express card slot, although I guess it could also just be the slot for the remote, if this were to have a remote. Right here is a Wi-Fi switch, and this not only controls Wi-Fi and Bluetooth, but also if you toggle it this way, it also triggers cellular data. And that's because this machine, well, it doesn't have it equipped, but it could have came preloaded with a 3G cellular data modem and a SIM card slot, which you could actually access underneath the battery. Excuse me. That's totally appropriate. And this would just allow you to run off of either Verizon's data or AT&T or something like that, and access the internet over 3G, which at the time of the late 2000s was actually quite a nice feature for a consumer-grade laptop like this. And you only really saw that feature on like the Latitude line and the Lenovo ThinkPads of the day, which is quite nice to see. You also get a DVD-RW drive. Not quite sure if this has LightScribe. I would assume that it does, and it just doesn't have the label on it. You have some kind of multi-system video out for televisions, which I'm assuming is just needing a special breakout cable because it includes not only S-Video, but also composite and maybe component, and two USB 2.0 ports. The rear of the laptop just has the hinges, the cooling vent, and the battery. And finally, on the left-hand side, we have your Kensington security lock, power in, 2 more USB 2.0 ports, which says a lot to the more modern laptops, which really only give you like 2 USB ports, or vice versa. You have like different combinations, but this has 4 full-speed, full-size USB ports, which is quite nice. Well, they're not USB 3.0, but whatever, you get my point. VGA port without the screws, which is kind of annoying. You do get both Ethernet and a modem, which is something quite nice to see on a late 2000s laptop. Modems stuck around in laptops, especially of the business grade nature, for until about 2012 or 2013, somewhere in there is when they finally phased out 56K modems as an option on for say the ThinkPad T420 and the Latitude E6430. I think were some of the last machines to have the phone modem jack as an option, if not pre-installed. Although I suppose it'd probably be just the Latitude E6420, not the E6430, although they could both have had that option. One really nice feature is HDMI, which you never see on a late 2000s laptop. And I say that because they really only showed up on the higher end of the consumer line, which this is a higher end machine. And it actually has an HDMI, I'm assuming that's 1.0. It could be a HDMI like 1.1 or 1.2 port. It's definitely not HDMI 2.0. And don't expect these HDMI ports to go past 720p because it's very early days for HDMI because many people were still using component to get their high definition. And you get a 4-pin FireWire port, or if you like to call it the IEEE 1394, you get a 4-pin connector for that. And finally, this is the spot for the hard drive. On the bottom of the computer, you get this really nice one-piece access plate that gives you access to not only the CPU cooler, but also the memory and your cards for wireless, which is really nice. And you get access to not only your Wi-Fi card, but the spots for Bluetooth and your cellular data are all underneath this cover to my knowledge. Of course, Windows Vista Home Premium Certificate of Authenticity, which I'm covering the product key for because you can still activate Windows Vista. And here we have Dell model number PP29L, requires adapter PA12, which I do have, and there is the Dell service tag in case you want to look up this machine on Dell's website, and just a bunch of governs on the different wireless and internal modems and wireless adapters inside the computer, as well as all the FCC stuff. Now, sadly, this is where this machine tends to kind of fall short in the design, and that is a lot of parts are painted. Specifically the keyboard. This keyboard is basically the same exact keyboard that is used inside of their Latitude business line of computers. And aside from having a little bit more of a spongy feel to it, not the more tactile feel like the D620 I own, it's very close in terms of the feel of the keys. But they are painted with a silver paint. And see if I can find some keys here to show you. But for example, if you look at the N key, you can kind of see that there's a wear spot there. And it's very hard to pick it up on the camera with this lighting, but you can kind of see right there in the middle of that N key, you can kind of make out some kind of decoloration there in the paint. Let me see if there's some other keys that actually exhibit this, more of the commonly used ones. Yeah, here we are. See, look at the S key. You can see that the S key has a little bit of decoloration. It's starting to show the gray plastic underneath. Same thing with the D key, and I think the space bar also kind of exhibits that, although not that much because it's just a shiny spot. Oh yeah, here, the J key. Look at the J key. So definitely a lot of PC manufacturers at that time were painting their laptops silver to try to make them look more attractive comparative to Apple's iBook. Well, basically at that point they had already transitioned to Intel, so you could basically say they're trying to make a more flashy looking computer to the white and the black MacBooks of the day, if you know what I'm talking about. This was around the same time period, although as you might have been able to predict, the MacBooks sold way, way better than these ever did because of the fact that these came pre-installed with everybody's most loved operating system of all time. Windows Vista Home Premium, everybody's favorite operating system. So what do you expect? But of course these things had support for Windows XP as well, so they weren't all too bad in the end, although these machines are preloaded with 32-bit Windows, and if you think you can install 64-bit, Well, you can, but you ain't going to get drivers from Dell that are 64-bit, so you're kind of screwed on that bit, even though they gave you a 64-bit processor. Not sure why that was, but that's how a lot of machines were back in the day. You got a 64-bit CPU, but the original equipment manufacturer only gave you 32-bit drivers, which is kind of annoying. Don't know why that is. This machine, I predict the touchpad wasn't used all that much because there is the ever so slightest bit of shiny spot on this touchpad, and you can't even pick it up. It's so minor. Although definitely the keyboard has a little bit more wear on it than the touchpad. They're both showing signs of having been used, but gently. And the keyboard isn't too dirty. I've done my best to try and clean it. There's a few spots of which I missed, but otherwise, it's just dust that's gotten into this because we live in a very dusty house and dusty environment, and so dust and lint just tends to get into everything. So my cleaning job didn't exactly do it any favors when I'm trying to present it here on video because you can see dust is all over the screen. But what do you know? It's a glossy display and shows people like this who run their videos on an iPhone 6s like an idiot, but I can't afford anything else at the moment. Moving on. Everything seems to be in pretty good working order. There's a little bit of wearing, but that's just because I had to take off this so I could tighten some screws and check the keyboard and everything underneath of it. I do got to make a comment about the hinges being MacBook-like because they're nicely weighted and they're not too loose. And there's no lid catch like the MacBooks have, but they're not magnetized. But you can easily open this thing up with one hand, and I don't know if that's just because the hinges are weak or if that was actually the design characteristic to have kind of loose feeling hinges, because it's quite a heavy screen for what it is, but you can still lift it up with just a finger and it's really smooth opening. It's actually pretty nicely done. Like, I gotta say, these 1500 series Inspirons from the Windows Vista era were really well put together. I must say, like, Dell actually put in the extra mile to design these things with at least a little bit of care. They're actually one of my favorite Dell laptops of all time, aside from the D series of Latitudes. These are actually very well made laptops for what they are. They're not the greatest, and they certainly fall short of MacBook build quality, but they're not bad. I mean, they can definitely hold their own, I gotta say. So these machines typically came with a 15-inch glossy LCD display. They're not LED backlit like their MacBook counterparts. And these only have a resolution of 1280 by 800, so they're not exactly impressive. But they do get decently bright. They're not the greatest because, of course, these machines are nearing 10 years old at this point. So, obviously, the backlights aren't going to be all that great, but they are functional enough, and this one seems to be, for the most part, fully functional. There are a few little marks where you can definitely tell where the backlight is not doing its job as it used to, but it still seems to backlight the screen pretty evenly. In terms of the specifications, and as a matter of fact, actually, you can kind of tell the wear on the silver painted keys a little bit easier in this lighting. Anyway, my digressions aside, the specifications of this machine we'll get into once we get into the BIOS here because I forgot them entirely. Fortunately, it's just a simple matter of going into the BIOS and dealing with an extremely dark screen. I'll be right back. Much brighter. A power cord helps. Anyway, I did actually update the BIOS on this machine to the latest BIOS because it was actually quite out of date when I got it. It was actually still on its 2008 BIOS, so I updated it to the latest, which is A16, which actually fixed the incorrect processor logo on the boot screen. It was showing the Turion 64X2 branding versus the Athlon 64X2 branding, which this has an Athlon 64X2 processor, not a Turion 64X2, so I don't know why that branding was incorrect, but it was. Anyway, it wasn't a deal breaker. It's a Turion 64X2 running at 1.9 gigahertz. I think it's a TK57 if I had to remember correctly. Factory installed 2 gigabytes of RAM because Windows Vista. Fortunately, it isn't dual channel. Originally shipped with a 160 gig hard drive, ATI Radeon Express 1270 graphics, and I gotta say, on the graphics side, this is a very uncommon chipset. I've never been able to find drivers for this outside of Dell, or Windows Vista for that matter. So I'm not sure what kind of chipset this is based upon, and where you can find the drivers for it past Windows Vista. I'm really not sure. And maybe it's my lack of research, but I just can't find anything on it, so whatever. Anyway, Dell Wireless, there's no Bluetooth or cellular on this particular unit, although it's not too hard to find those and actually add them yourself, which would make this machine a very capable machine even today if you were to max it out. The battery is charging. It's not the greatest battery. It lasts about an hour and a half if you want to push it, but I wouldn't trust it because it's not a genuine Dell battery. which is really surprising because I'm surprised the battery stuff's not being triggered in the BIOS, because usually these Dell laptops are picky about genuine parts, especially their power adapters. There's not much inside of the Dell BIOS that's really interesting other than this video memory size, which is kind of weird because depending on how much system memory you have will depend on how much video memory is allocated to the system. So it's kind of interesting that they do this. Anyway, there's a bunch of stuff in here, including one interesting switch called the NXE support. And for those who don't know, Windows 8 was the first Windows that required CPU or integrated into the CPU, no execute integrated into the CPU. I'm trying to get it in words. I'm doing a really bad job at explaining this. I'm not a very good verbal explainer. I'm a better visual demonstrator. I digress. But no, this is what's going to help guard the computer against viruses and buffer overflows inside of the hardware and other stuff like that. But if you turn this off, you cannot run anything newer than Windows 7, and some programs or some operating systems might actually fail to start because of this setting. But with this enabled, you can run Windows 8 or newer, which is nice. And thankfully, CompuTrace is deactivated, so that's not actually, it's not actually activated, thank God. So, yeah. I don't want to activate it or deactivate it or anything because, of course, you can't change it after the fact. I mean, some businesses do, but, you know. There's also some kind of, like, speed step technology called AMD Power Now, which I've never seen on anything until this. I guess it's some kind of, like, Intel speed step sort of thing. That's all that's interesting inside of the BIOS. Let's go ahead and boot it up. Now, I did end up having to repaste the CPU on this machine because there was basically no thermal paste on the CPU whatsoever. And as a matter of fact, I think I got rid of the picture, but if you were on my Discord, you would have clearly saw that there was like no thermal paste on the CPU from the factory. I don't know if it had been tampered with before I got it, or if that's just how it had always been, because the thermal paste had just dried up and it just wasn't doing its job anymore and it all got stuck to the heatsink. It was quite nasty. Not very good at all. So needless to say, I had a fun time trying to clean that off. Not really. But I did get it repasted, and it's a lot better than it was. It's not perfect because the fan still tends to spin up a lot, and you'll hear it a lot throughout this video. You'll hear it constantly spinning up and down and spinning up and down. So it's better than it was, but it's not perfect, and I'm assuming that's just because that's how the CPU is. It just heats up really quickly. So that kind of sucks, but it is what it is. I'm assuming it's probably Windows Vista being a CPU hog, if I had to guess. The one disappointment about this machine, I've got to say, are the speakers. They are the worst part of this machine. The display is actually pretty decent for what it is, but the speakers, they just absolutely, without a doubt, they suck. And I'm sure it's not a driver problem. It's literally because the two speakers that are in this machine, and I think one's right there and the other's over there, they're so tiny and they're not even that thick, and they just suck in audio quality. They're not good at all. All you really get out of them is highs and the tiniest little bit of mids. There's absolutely no lows, and I just remembered that's the wrong password. Get it right, Jordan. Learn to remember your Microsoft account password, you idiot. Hence the hint. Anyway, enough of that. Let's get into the operating system. I was checking out temperatures with SpeedFan because I wasn't sure if my thermal paste was working as it should, but it indeed is, so it's just a fact that this CPU just runs pretty hot, so it is what it is. But as you can tell, Inspiron. This is the factory installed Windows Vista Home Premium installation on the hard drive. It actually still has all of the recovery software on the hard drive, and so if anybody would like to see a video of me demonstrating that recovery software on YouTube, let me know in the comments below. Just pop a comment down there and let me know. I might want to do that. I don't know. I got a spare hard drive I want to toss in that's a 500 gig just to see if maybe this see what this machine can really do. I know it'll run Windows 7 beautifully because this machine, it runs Vista just fine, so it'll run Windows 7 just fine. I know that bit, so that's not really much of an interesting, video topic to cover, but it'd be interesting to see how Windows 10 would run on this system. I'm not really sure. I mean, it's a DDR2 667 mobile system, so I know the performance would probably suffer at least a little bit, but really, I mean, it's not too bad right now in Windows Vista. I mean, it's pretty usable, and it's a smart idea that Dell actually put 2 gigs of RAM in this when it was new. Although I guess that might have been a BTO option, because I'm pretty sure, most certainly, that these would have only came with 1 gigabyte when they were new. But somebody was either smart and they put in the extra gigabyte of memory and additional cost, or this one came with 2 gigs from the factory, because look at that memory usage. It's this machine would not have survived on Vista had it only had the single gig. But 2 gigs was a pretty smart order on the top of Dell, so it actually helps this machine run so nicely. In fact, it's really smooth on Vista. This was one of the nicest Vista machines I've ever used. Except for this stupid touchpad. I just cannot get used to it. I mean, it looks like it's working fine now, but that's because you really got to put your finger into this touchpad to get it to work. And I'm not saying, like, rub the texture off your skin, but, like, if you have the lightest touch, it tends to misdetect when you're trying to move the mouse, and it's aggravating. It's not a very good touchpad. In fact, there's absolutely no precise drivers on this whatsoever. It's probably one of the worst Synaptics touchpads I've ever used, and I don't know if it's just this unit or if it was all the Inspiron 1526s or 1500 series that were made with Windows Vista preloaded. I don't know. Anyway, what kind of software is on this? The only thing I've really ran on this is Firefox. That would have a modern web browser and SpeedFan and Windows updates, of course. So I'm not sure what all's on this. Roxio Creator DE is kind of like one of those... what the heck would it be? It's probably similar to like Toast, if you know what I'm talking about. I'm pretty sure people would know what I'm talking about. Toast Titanium or something. At least that's the Mac version. But it was made by Roxio as well, as far as I know. But this is back in 2007. I think this is before Toast even came out. You can tell this was dated 2007. The newest version is Roxio Creator NXT6, so that's kind of interesting. But you can tell it's one of these where it's like Nero or something similar, where you can create an audio CD, or you can make a data disk, or you can copy stuff. And the cool thing is you can actually make disk images with the system. As far as I know, you can make like .isos or .imgs, and apparently this one saves in .gi format. Not a standard format at all, but let me see if you can actually set it to be an ISO. Yes, indeed you can make ISO images on this computer. That's pretty sweet. So look, I found a use for making disk images on this machine. It has the software preloaded, which I don't even care it's Windows Vista. I mean, as long as it does its job, you know, that's pretty good. But this software is very useful for those who can make good use of it. It works pretty well. And the DVD drive in this laptop does indeed work. You can tell some Dell utilities here. As a matter of fact, actually, let's go ahead and press this home button here, and we'll see what it launches into. I'm assuming it's going to just launch Windows Media Center, but let's see. Because it's actually, yep, it actually loads Media Direct. I thought it was going to load Media Center, or the Windows Media Center, but maybe there's just those two choices that you can have one or the other. Never set this up. Now, Media Direct, for those who don't know, is kind of like this offline sort of media center thing. You can jump right in and you can look at your pictures or listen to music or watch videos, and you don't have to go through Windows necessarily to do it. I mean, granted, yes, it does run on top of Windows, but you don't have to have Windows in order to do everything, and apparently that needed to load. Apparently it's actually made by Cyberlink, not by Dell. Interesting. Anyway, back to this. You can tell it's very similar in layout to Windows Media Center, but it's not the same. It's not quite the same. It looks similar to the Windows XP Media Center, if anybody knows what I'm talking about, except the interface is a little different. Actually, a lot different, but, you know. As a matter of fact, it actually comes with, like, some kind of thing with some kind of instant office. I'm not sure what you're supposed to do with this. I guess you control it with the mouse? I'm really not sure. I'm not really sure what kind of file formats this would actually be compatible with. But anyway, that's that. Internet Explorer 9 can go screw itself. It's out of support now. It'll make me wonder what the Microsoft page for Internet Explorer 9 actually says here real quick. This ought to be glorious. Internet Explorer 11 with a little bit of Chinese in the mix. That's good. It's good. Anyway, let's go ahead and download that update. Oh, it's not even available anymore. Wah, wah. That's probably Internet Explorer's fault. I'm going to blame it on Internet Explorer on that one. What else is there? There's not a whole heck of a lot. This is a pretty bare bones install of Windows Vista. In fact, actually, the only real major piece of software on there besides the Media Direct would be Works 9. That's the only other major piece of software that's actually on this, and sure, why not? So, I mean, you can get some word processing done on this system. It is more than usable enough for that sort of thing, so let's just go ahead and we'll launch the word processor here. And there you go. There you got your word processor. So, yeah, you could definitely get some work done. It's not the greatest because you don't get a presentation maker, but you get the basics. So, more than usable. And of course, one could actually install Microsoft Office 2007 or 2010 on the system and actually get real work done. Although, why you want to do it on Windows Vista anymore, I don't know. I think that's about it, honestly. I mean, there's no point in me launching Firefox and trying to browse the web. We all know what the internet looks like. Otherwise, you probably don't know how the heck you got to watching this video. So yeah, that's about it when it comes to this machine. I mean, honestly, I don't know what I'm going to do with it. I just picked it up because it was a pretty clean example of a Dell Inspiron 1500 series, and I really like these machines, like I said, these particular designs of Inspiron 1500 series. I know the early 1500 series still use the sort of the square classic Inspiron 6000 like design, but I really like these ones because they have that updated visual style, and I mean, this one just looks really good, and the screen's not scratched to hell, the hinges aren't fucked. I mean, the battery's not the greatest, but at least it works, and it's got a pretty decent CPU in it. I mean, these Athlon 64 X2s you can still use on Windows 10 today. Well, I guess you could say the same thing for the Intel variants of these Inspiron 1500 series. There were Intel and AMD variants of these, of which you could get like a Celeron or a Pentium dual core, or if you're really rich, you could get a Core 2 Duo. But these ones, they came with either Semprons, Athlon 64s, or sorry, Turion 64s, and their X2 variants, as well as the Athlon 64 and their X2 variants, so on and so forth. But yeah, the Core 2 Duo versions of these were the fastest ones, and I believe those systems had Intel 965 chipsets in them. I'm not quite sure on that. They could have had 945s considering when they were made, but I would take a gamble and say there were 965 units because they were made in 2008. But this one's not too bad. I mean, this one would happily run Windows 10. I'd probably be a little skeptical on the graphics driver, but you could happily run Windows 10 on a system like this nowadays, as long as you probably bump the memory up from 2 gigabytes, although that wouldn't stop you from installing Windows 10. As you can see, ATI Radeon X1270. It says 192 megabytes of dedicated video memory. But what's interesting is if you were to go under the Task Manager, for example, and go under the Performance tab, it doesn't look like 192 megabytes of memory are being shared. It looks like it's only sharing 128. So I'm not sure if it has dedicated video memory and it uses the rest as shared video memory, which I'm not sure what the whole hybrid dedicated and shared system memory sort of thing is supposed to be with this, but it's only a 192 meg apparently according to Windows, but it's only sharing 128 megs of video memory, so who knows if it's got like 64 megs of dedicated video memory. I'm really not sure, but I'm not about to go tweaking with that because that's good. In the words of Zero Ducks Given, you just it's good, it's good. Yeah, that's what happens when it starts checking for updates. It just slams the system memory. It doesn't feel that unresponsive though, even when it hits that, so I mean, it's not a huge deal breaker, but you know, Windows Vista has definitely seen it's definitely seen its time. But that's all I got to say about the Inspiron 1526 in this video. So I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch, and if you guys would still like to see the recovery software being demonstrated, or if you're interested at all in wanting to take a look at that, please let me know down below in the comments section. Oh god. Radeon driver, lagging Vista. You rarely ever see that shut down now screen with the unresponsive program. You rarely see that in Vista. So if you see it in Vista, you know you got a slow computer. But this isn't slow by any means. It's just the stupid Catalyst Control Center and the fact it tried to check for Windows updates. So what do you do? But anyway, guys, that's it for this video. Like I said, I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch, and I'll see you on the next one.